there, Bourbon Real Talk listeners and watchers. Randy Sullivan here with a very interesting piece of information for you today, and that is the bourbon that you're drinking may not be what you think it is. So there has been kind of this tradition in the bourbon industry that seems counterintuitive given the definition of bourbon. So bourbon in 1964 was designated by the US Congress as a distinctive product of the United States. And all of the laws associated with bourbon were meant to create consumer confidence so that it didn't matter whether you lived in the United States or on the other side of planet Earth. When you picked up that bottle that said that it was bourbon, you knew that it came from America, and you knew that it was a pure product that had not been adulterated. And that was kind of the purpose. So the interesting thing about bourbon is it's supposed to be the most honest of all the spirits. However, there is a lot of subterfuge in the bourbon marketing industry. And some of that stuff is upsetting to me. And so when you're talking about a product that has such a wide range of potential price ranges, I mean, there are good quality bourbons that are around $20, and there are bottles that get released for one got released for $10,000, right? I mean, that's a lot of money. And so if you're talking about something that costs somewhere between $20 and $10,000, you better know what it is that's in the bottle and what it is that you're getting. And with so much duplicity, it's pretty easy for you to buy something that is actually not a good value. Now, why does this happen? Well, the main reason why this happens is through something we call non-distiller producer. What that means is that if you want to be a person who makes whiskey in the United States, you have to be issued a distiller's special permit, a DSP number from the TTB, and then you're able to make spirits, but you're also able to buy spirits from other spirits producers. And the startup cost of an actual distillery, especially a whiskey distillery, is astronomical. Because when you think about it, not only do they have to have the facility and all of the equipment and all of the materials and all of the staff associated with it and the barrel and all that stuff, but they also have to have some sort of a barrel aging warehouse, and they have to make all of the product and let it age typically for 4+ years before they ever sell it. Now, from a technical standpoint, bourbon doesn't have to be aged for a particular amount of time. If it's a straight bourbon, it has to be at least 2 years and at least 4 years to be non-age stated. And for that reason, most bourbons are aged for at least 4 years. Well, if you were going to start up a business that was going to have all of the expenses associated with a 4 or 5 year old business from day one, but you weren't allowed to sell a single product for 4 or 5 years, that would be a very difficult business to get started. And for that reason, it's very popular for distilleries to do a couple of things to make ends meet while they're aging up their products. And one of the things that they'll do is make clear spirits, vodkas, gins, things like that, that can be made, immediately bottled, and sold. But something else that they'll do is they'll buy aged spirits from other producers and bottle that in their bottle, and that's what's called a non-distiller producer. There is another process that some new distilleries will go through. It's what we call contract distillation. It gets rid of some of the startup costs because contract distillation is where you go to another distillery who already paid for all of the equipment and the aging space and have all of the right staff. You design your own mash bill, and then they will make your whiskey for you. And in some instances, they age it up for you in their warehouse. In some instances, you take it back and age it yourself wherever your home state is. And so there's a subtle distinction between contract distillation and a non-distiller producer. But a non-distiller producer situation can be ideal for a new distillery because they can start selling aged product from the day that they are licensed to do so. So what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is you as a consumer have to have a lot of background knowledge to be able to decipher whether or not a bottle is a good bottle for you to invest your money in. Because there's various levels of disclosure from non-distiller producers. And even though there are laws on the books that state that they have to very clearly indicate somewhere on the front or back label what the state of distillation is, some of the time the COLA approvals that get submitted get approved even though all of the disclosures that are supposed to be on there are not on there. And there's been many instances of deceptive practices that were meant to kind of trick the consumer into thinking that the product in the bottle is something that it's not. So there's been a couple of pretty famous examples. Back in 2015, there was a couple of class action lawsuits. One against Tin Cup, which is a whiskey producer out of Colorado, I believe. And one against Templeton Rye from my wife's home state of Iowa. And both of these companies figured out that there's a certain state pride, there's a local pride that they can take advantage of in their marketing. And so they were labeling their bottles in such a way that the people thought that the spirits were being made in that state, when in fact, they were actually coming from other producers. There was a class action lawsuit, it was settled. They had to change their labels to be more clear. And now they have more clear labeling. And they've actually, in the case of Templeton, they have some of their own products now that they're able to bottle up. So let's talk a little bit about labels. So obviously, when you're talking about a bourbon, you're gonna have the brand, and sometimes the brand has a state name in it, right? And then you're going to have some other information on there, like it might say, like this one does, that it's a straight Kentucky bourbon. And that word straight without a age statement means at least 4 years. This one says that it's 11 and a half years old. Now, somewhere on here, it has to have this state of distillation. And on the back here, it actually says that this whiskey was distilled in the state of Kentucky. And so that doesn't really tell us who made it, though, which would be critical information to decide whether or not you wanted to buy this bottle, right? And so there are a number of companies that are known for making whiskey and selling it to other brands that are going to bottle that under their label as a non-distiller producer. Probably the most famous of which is MGPI. That company is in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, just on the other side of the border of Kentucky, practically northern Kentucky, but technically in the state of Indiana. They've been operating on that location since 1850. And they make really great whiskey, but their business model was in recent years, they didn't even own a whiskey label. They didn't have a brand. They didn't even have a bottling facility that they owned on location, because in one of the transfers of ownership, the ownership of the bottling location got sold to a different company than ownership of the distillery. And so all they're doing is making whiskey and then selling barrels to other people, and they've got to figure out how to get it bottled, right? And MGPI makes some great stuff. And there was a while where whiskey nerds would just kind of thumb their nose at, I don't care for that brand because it's just MGPI, it's just MGPI. Well, something amazing happened. MGPI had the only really high-aged straight bourbon on the market for sale to MDPs. And a lot of MDPs started buying it and making a lot of money off of it. And that caused other NDPs to want to jump in and start buying that high-aged juice and bottling it up and growing their own brands. And next thing you know, MGPI is starting to run out of the high-aged stuff. And they're a publicly traded company. And in my opinion, Wall Street doesn't know how to value whiskey companies very well, because most of the value of a whiskey company has to do with the stock that it has aging. And so when their revenue started to decline because they started to run out of the really desirable juice that everybody was going after, it created a problem for a lot of brands because they were unable to continue the great product lines that people had come to know and love, probably the most famous of which would be Old Scout, Smooth Ambler Old Scout. They had developed almost a cult following because they had all of these really high-age MGP releases, and then all of that kind of went away. And so what then ended up happening was there's another company that's actually in Tennessee, not too far from the Jack Daniel's distillery, called Dickel. And Dickel had a lot of really high-aged product. And Dickel's got a very loyal following, and people that love Dickel are just really excited about the brand. But the owners of Dickel realized that if they took that, 13, 14, 15-year-old barrel of Dickel and put it in their Dickel bottle, they were extremely limited in how much money they could sell that for, because their customer base has an expectation of pricing that's been set over the decades, right? and that they could take that same barrel and sell it to a non-distiller producer and let them bottle it in their label. They could charge a whole lot more for it. Therefore, they could sell the barrel for more than they could sell it through their own lines. And some of these brands that had kind of built a reputation around the high-age MGP had run out of high-age MGP, so they started bottling up Dickel. And this created a problem for consumers because when you walked in and you saw a Smooth Ambler Old Scout that was 13 years old, you thought you knew exactly what it was going to taste like. You thought you were getting premium MGP product. But then you get home and you crack open your bottle, and lo and behold, it's actually about a $45 bottle of Dickel that you just paid some exorbitant amount of money for. And so that's basically what I want to protect you guys from, is to learn a little bit about labels and how to identify a non-distiller producer and to figure out what is it worth and do I want to invest in it. 1792, owned by Sazerac. They are also occasionally selling barrels to other companies, usually either larger industry players or somebody that's also owned or partially owned by Sazerac. Heaven Hill, on occasion, has been known to release some barrels. They make Elijah Craig, Evan Williams, McKenna, many other brands. And then, but there's not a lot of high-age barrels available out there because most of the companies that make whiskey also have limited edition releases, and it makes more sense for them to keep those barrels for themselves, let them out into the public through a limited edition, which has almost unlimited pricing potential, and then they build the value of a brand that they own and they get to keep that future equity. And for that reason, there's just not a lot of high-age barrels available out there, which means there's a very limited pool of people that it could have come from when you identify as a bottle is a non-distiller producer. Now, part of the reason why these non-distiller producer brands are so expensive is because some of these barrels have been held by a barrel broker for years. And there are companies out there that will bulk buy barrels of whiskey and then kind of hold on to them and wait and see what happens. They'll age them up, which increases their value. And if they bought barrels, back in 2012, 13, 14, and they held on to them until now, they were big winners. Those barrels have gone up in value tremendously. And those barrel brokers that have those barrels, they know what they're sitting on, they know how valuable they are, and they will transfer those out to a non-distiller producer for a pretty penny, take their profit. Now the non-distiller producer has to release that juice at a very high price to recoup their cost of the barrel. Now, there is a major player in this space. It's, if not the largest, one of the largest beverage conglomerates in the world. It's Diageo. And Diageo is known to take advantage of consumers' lack of information to line their own pockets for profit, right? So they've come out with a couple of product lines, Orphan Barrel, which, don't get me wrong, they make great juice, but at the time that Orphan Barrel was released, there was a lot of deception in the marketing, and the bottles were exceptionally overpriced compared to similar counterparts at the time that line was released. Prices have gone crazy since then, and now they seem to be more in alignment with other non-distiller producers where the juice is of that age, and they've started to seem like more of a value. But when they first came out, this was one of the ones that I kind of felt like I got stung by because I was jumping in and buying them, and they were very expensive bottles at the time. And when I'd taste them compared to their counterparts, I was like, I don't know that it's worth it. They also released a line called Blade and Bow, and this one has like a little key on it and all that stuff. And a similar situation, what a lot of them want to do is they want to, and a lot of the Diageo releases have been to take advantage of the Pappy Van Winkle craze. Now, Diageo doesn't have anything to do with the Van Winkle line, but Van Winkle used to be produced by a distillery that closed down called Stitzelweller, and Stitzelweller had barrels aging when they closed down, and Diageo was able to buy some of those barrels. And since Diageo owned these barrels that were associated with the producer who used to make Pappy Van Winkle, they would kind of use wording in their marketing that made it sound like that this was basically an old bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, even though they never disclosed how much of that Stitzelweller juice was in any particular barrel blend that they had done. And I didn't like that because they were obviously charging more money than they would have because they had that positive association, and there wasn't a lot of disclosure. And Diageo also owns Dickel, which is a company that's created a lot of confusion in the non-distiller producer space because they are selling those high-aged barrels, and often to producers who have released bourbon products at that age in the past through MGPI or through a Kentucky producer, and now they're releasing this Dickel Tennessee product, which has a very distinct flavor that not everybody loves, and people feel like they've been duped by it. And that's kind of my impression of Diageo, is that they trick the consuming public to make money. Now, we also have a lot of celebrity brands that have come out lately that are non-distiller producers, because let's face it, if you're a celebrity, you're probably not going to invest the $25 million that it takes just to start up a distillery and then wait the 4 to 5 years before you have a halfway decent product to sell. You're probably just going to slap your name on somebody else's whiskey and call it a day. Recently, Marianne Eaves, who has kind of been made famous by the Neat documentary, she also was the first female master distiller in Kentucky post-Prohibition. She had been made the master distiller of Castle and Key. She ended up leaving under suspicious circumstances before her first whiskey that she had ever distilled was sold and released. And she got involved with Peyton Manning for this Sweeten's Cove release. And Sweeten's Cove is a Tennessee golf course that Peyton bought with his brother and a bunch of other celebrities. And they have a lot of whiskey drinkers that go there. So they come up with this bright idea: let's make a Sweeten's Cove whiskey. And so they get this, star-studded cast of people together. They got Marianne Eaves for the master blender, and they've got all of these celebrities that are involved. And they just went out and bought $45 Dickel, and then they put it in a bottle, slapped everyone's name on it, and sold it for $180. I kind of don't like that because there were a lot of people who were probably new in the premium whiskey space that believed that if Peyton Manning's name's on it, that it must be worth it. And I feel like that's not good for the future of bourbon. I feel like we need to be more honest with consumers. You've got Heaven's Door by Bob Dylan. I don't have any major problems with that one. But I do believe there's a little bit of a premium charge because it's got Bob Dylan's name associated with it. You've got the blackened American whiskey for Metallica, the band. And when you go online and you look it up, they play, a bass line from Metallica music in the aging warehouse, and they're telling everybody that those vibrations cause the whiskey to develop a more rich flavor and all this. And to be quite honest, that's all bullshit. And so, celebrity brands, kind of gimmicky, a lot of times non-distiller produced, not a good value. So be on the lookout for those. There are some other brands that have come out. The one that we already looked at, this Cream of Kentucky, pretty darn good whiskey. I believe this bottle was around $125 when it came out. The thing that upset me about this bottle is that, they're not very forthcoming with information about who actually made this whiskey. And rumor on the street is that it was made by 1792. This is a 1792 bottled in bond product, which is 100 proof. And this bottle costs about $40. And this is a Cream of Kentucky that costs about $125. Now, I'm not super mad at it because 1792 bottled in bond is a non-age stated product, and this one is age stated at 11.5 years. And generally speaking, if it's a Kentucky bourbon from a reputable producer, I'm willing to pay around $10 per year of aging. So if you got a 10-year product, I'm happy at $100. You got a 15-year product, I'm happy at about $150. There are definitely some exceptions to that rule. So this wasn't priced outrageously out of the price range, but given that it is likely a 1792 product, I felt like there was a little bit of marketing trickery there. You've got Kentucky Owl. Kentucky Owl has been famous for the non-distiller producer play, where their first rye release came out at I think $119 or something like that, and it did very well. Everybody loved it. And then they came out next year with another release, and it was supposedly a couple years younger. They had taken the proof down by about 10 proof points, which obviously stretches their product because they were able to add water that cost them almost nothing to it to increase the number of bottles that they sold. And then they raised the price up another $50, $60, $70. And you know, people were turned off by that. Now, Kentucky Owl announced these plans. They were going to build this like huge, you know, theme park in Kentucky, and everybody got excited about it. It's supposed to be done by now, and they haven't even broken ground. And that's partly because their pricing practices have, in my opinion, kind of turned the public away from the brand, or at least the whiskey nerds that were very excited about the brand when they came out with Kentucky Owl Confiscated, which is their shelf, you know, bourbon product. I believe it was over $100, and I believe that was also $17.92. And so, you know, there's just stuff like that. Old Charter is another one that's gotten some great releases of Kentucky bourbon, built a name for itself, and then they went out and started releasing high.This product. And there were a lot of people that bought it thinking that they were getting the good Kentucky juice, and they didn't. Smoke Wagon is one of the brands that I really like because they're really good at disclosing what is in the bottle, right? And so that's one of the things that we can learn today. So we've already talked about reading labels. So if you were to just look at this label and you see that it says that it's, you know, Nevada H&C Distilling Co. in Las Vegas, you would think like, oh, well, this whiskey was probably made in Las Vegas. But if you turn it around to the back, it says that the contents of the bottle were not from one barrel and that it was hand-picked for the unique taste characteristics. And once it's gone, it won't be there anymore. And so you're like, wait a minute, did they pick barrels from someplace else? And they picked those barrels because they thought they had good flavor characteristics? Or are they saying we picked through our barrel inventory that we made? And if you look right down here in almost microscopic print, it says distilled in Indiana, okay? So if you're looking at a bottle and it's a non-distiller producer, you know, if you look on the back label, somewhere on there, it should have a state of distillation. And if the state of distillation is Indiana, you know you're dealing with an MGPI product. If it's Tennessee, you're pretty much assured that you're dealing with a Dickel product, because the only other distillery large enough in Tennessee to actually sell barrels, finished barrels, to another DSP would be Jack Daniel's, and they don't sell barrels to anyone else. So, you know, that's kind of the cheat sheet. And then you can come to understand, well, what's a Dickel worth? You know, if I want to try this bottle out, you know, and they're trying to sell me this 13-year Dickel for, you know, $180, which I believe that's what the Old Charter was that I tried that was a higher age Dickel, I'm going to pass on that. But if there's another non-distiller producer that's got it down around the, you know, 50, 55 range, and I'm within, you know, $10, $15 of what I'd pay for that product if it was in a Dickel bottle, I might give it a try. I might check that out. Smoke Wagon is an interesting one because, you know, they still have some high-age MGP barrels, and those are the sky's almost the limit. I mean, I've seen a 13-year MGP that sold at retail for $180, sold out instantly, and then started trading on the secondary for $400, $450. And so, you know, if Smoke Wagon wants to charge $110, $120 for a 13-year MGPI, that's not a bad value, but you have to have been in the whiskey space long enough to know those things before you're not just a consumer that's being taken advantage of. And I think that part of the reason why there's so much deception in whiskey marketing is because a lot of the history of whiskey was illegal, right? I mean, you've always had bootlegging of whiskey in the United States where, you know, there were moonshiners and people that were trying to avoid taxation. So they were trying to make, you know, whiskey for their local public and sell it locally. We obviously had Prohibition, right? And Prohibition caused there to be an enormous increase in bootlegging. And many of those people became so wealthy so quick that they were able to participate on the back end after Prohibition ended. And I believe that that criminal mindset may have crept its way into the mainstream whiskey industry, just as kind of a holdover from all the illegal activity that used to just be a mainstay in the whiskey production world. And so now it's like it never went away. You know, it's okay to say whatever it is that you want to say about your whiskey, just so long as it gets it sold and you make a little bit of money. So how do you keep from getting ripped off? Well, one, I recommend that you learn how to read labels, right? And we've talked a little bit about that. You can go online, Google, how do you read a whiskey label? You can also use Google just to figure out, you know, what is a product selling for? If you Google any whiskey from inside the liquor store on your phone, on the first page, there's going to be 4 or 5 reviews of people that have actually tasted that whiskey, that are at least interested enough in doing reviews that they're able to get their reviews on the first page of Google, right? So I'm not saying that all those people are 100% trustworthy, but you can at least get an idea. And often when they do their review, they'll tell you what they were able to find out about the source of the whiskey, whether or not they think it's a good value, as well as some tasting notes and their opinion of, you know, where's the quality price ratio on this. Another thing that I would strongly recommend you do, if you are not already a member of a local whiskey community, there are a lot of excellent whiskey groups that are on Facebook, Instagram. I'm heavily involved in a Facebook whiskey group called Someone Say Whiskey. Membership is absolutely free. Each group has its own culture. Some are a little bit more, you know, trash talk and giving each other a hard time. But some are very whiskey focused, and it's a great place that you can go and you can ask questions. Often, if you're in a liquor store and you snap a picture of a new bottle you're unfamiliar with, you throw it up in this club, within 2-3 minutes, you're gonna have 4 or 5 people that can tell you about that whiskey. They can tell you whether or not they think it's a good value. Some of the clubs you'll get attacked for doing that, but some, you know, you just gotta find one that's good for you. But at the end of the day, if you're looking at a bottle, especially an expensive bottle, and I would say anything that's above $60-70 is starting to get up there for bourbon. If you're not sure about it, just pass on it. Because as much as we all want to go out there and get all those rare bourbons that are hard to find, we have to remember that most of the whiskey has been made by less than 14 distilleries for the last, you know, since Prohibition. And there are plenty of shelf available high quality bourbons out there at a reasonable price, and you don't have to chase after these non-distiller produced bottles that are coming out as limited editions that are super expensive to have a really good time in your bourbon drinking experience. So if you're unsure, just pass and pick something up that's a known quantity. So I always end every podcast the same. I'd like to invite you to check out our website at bourbonrealtalk.com. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook /Bourbon Real Talk. We would love it if you would subscribe, like, and review, and maybe throw in a comment. Those things help new people to find the content. Even if you're not going to listen all the time, it's still great if you subscribe. It helps the algorithm so that they'll show it to more people. And I always end with the very same catchphrase, and it's been a while since I told everybody why I say it, so I'm going to tell you again. In 2014, I lost my younger brother to suicide. And I realized later that he felt very disconnected from the world around him and felt very lonely. He was a military veteran, and he did have some problems. He had some injuries and things like that when he came out of the military, and you know, he was addicted to painkillers and things. And so, you know, he felt very alone and made that terrible decision to take his life. And I just don't want anyone to ever feel like they're alone. So I try to use this podcast to use the connective power of whiskey to bring people together. And since I've gotten involved in the whiskey community, I feel like I've got brothers and sisters all around me who care about me, that I can spend time with, and it makes life more enjoyable. And it's really hard to feel alone when you have that many people that are participating in your life. So with that in mind, I will end with my sign off. If you woke up this morning and you were unsure whether or not anyone loved you, just know that I love you, and I'll see you next time on Bourbon Real Talk. This content is being brought to you by the Bourbon Real Talk American Whiskey Aroma Kit. This is a tool that I put together to help all you whiskey aficionados out there Develop your palates. You can sit down with the vials and train your senses, or you can sit down with a great dram and break that whiskey down to its components. If you have any interest of purchasing a kit of your own, head on over to bourbonrealtalk.com/shop and pick one up. Thank you for listening.